Welcome to Go For Side Effects. I'm your host, Kevin Simon. You all know my co-host, John. John, how you doing?
Hey, everyone. Doing good. Thank you.
So tonight, it is veteran talk, but with a little twist. I got a hold of Dr.Golomb today, and she is on air with us, and she put out a study that was sent to me that needs to be talked about. How you doing, Dr. Golomb?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, hey, welcome back. Welcome back. You were hit last time. Everybody loves you on here.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Okay, so let's get into the hot topic. So I got to read some of your research study that they put out. Let's go ahead and I'm going to let you just dive right into it.
Okay, so a little bit of background. There's kind of been two rival hypotheses about what causes Gulf War illness. And the one that I think it would be fair to say most people have subscribed to has been that it's caused by inflammation. And that never made sense to me as a cause of Gulf War illness because I've had lots of patients with much more inflammation based on blood markers. And one of those common blood markers is called C-reactive protein, CRP or HS-CRP, that don't have Gulf War illness symptoms. And on top of that, it doesn't really explain the profile of symptoms, which are dominantly fatigue, muscle, and brain, and doesn't explain why some people had differing latency to onset of the symptoms, with about 40% of the excess Gulf War symptoms taking more than a year to appear. So I was sort of the primary pusher of the mitochondrial hypothesis that the energy powerhouses of cells are responsible, because that really, to me, explained everything. So the leading symptoms with mitochondrial problems are fatigue, muscle, and brain, and that's because it dominantly is a problem. It's a problem for all organs and all sort of symptoms, basically, which we see in Gulf War veterans, but it's especially a problem for organs that have high demands on energy, because then if there's a shortfall in supply, they're hit harder. The analogy I give, which I might have given last time, is if you have two plants, one of which is a cactus and very drought resistant, and another of which is flourishing and doing a lot of stuff and producing fruit and leaves but needs a lot of water, then if there's a drought, then it's the second one that is hit hard. Similarly, if there are parts of the body that need a lot of energy, just like that plant needs a lot of water, then if there's a problem with cell energy, those are the parts of the body that are going to be hit the hardest. So brain and muscle are two, quote, energy demanding tissues, and they're also what's called post-mitotic, which means they're mostly done with their dividing. So you can't replace them all the time like you can with blood cells. So they tend to be hit worse. And then on top of that, it is well known with mitochondrial problems that the symptoms with the same kind of level of mitochondrial problem vary from person to person like they do in Gulf War illness. And I won't go into why that is, but it's basically because you inherit your mom's mitochondrial genetics, but she's got a few mitochondria, and when her egg splits, and again, this may be old news to those who heard us last time, but when her egg splits and then divides and becomes different organs, there might be some mitochondria that had mutations that are going to some organs and not others, and so that makes some organs more vulnerable than others. And that'll be different even for two identical twins. So it explains why different people have different symptoms. It explains which symptoms are most common. And because of something called mitochondrial threshold effects, where mitochondrial injury begets more mitochondrial injury and cell loss, but you only see symptoms once a certain, quote, threshold of injury is reached. So the time to symptom onset after the original injury will also vary from organ to organ and from person to person. So all of these classic manifestations of Gulf War illness were not only expected but predicted with the mitochondrial theory, and really not explained at all by the inflammatory theory. So we had some indirect evidence before. There's somebody's trying to call me, which I will just let that go. But there's a technique that you can do without being invasive called, can I get somebody off the phone? We're recording. I'll just keep going. Anyway, there's a technique called 31-phosphorus magnetic resonance spectroscopy that lets you look at different phosphorus-containing products in a tissue, like the muscle. And one of those phosphorus-containing products is phosphocreatine, and that is a backup energy source for muscle, and it gets depressed when there's exercise, and the rate of recovery depends on the rate of energy production by cells, the rate of, quote, ATP production. And so a longer recovery time means slower ATP production, so it means mitochondrial damage. And we already found, yep.
So I got a question, Doc. So
Yep.
So when I go out and I work on something, whatever it is, for like 45 minutes, and then, I don't know, let's just say I mow a lawn for a couple hours, or I'm going out working in the shop or doing something somewhat vigorously.
Yep.
And then at the end, I find myself, and I think I find a lot of fellow veterans, it's you're like really super fatigued, and it seems like it takes me longer to recover. Is that part of it? And second question is,
Exactly. You are spot on. And
okay.
that's because this phosphocreatine goes down with exercise, and as Gulf War veterans, Gulf War veterans don't recover that as fast as other people do. There's slowed phosphocreatine recovery. And I will mention, that there are some athletes and so forth that take, quote, creatine, unquote, supplements, and that sometimes those can be helpful for increasing muscle strength and reducing muscle fatigability, because they help to restore these levels of phosphocreatine that can have trouble recovering to baseline. And we don't really even exactly know if that baseline is fully as great, but what's clearly different is the recovery of that phosphocreatine in Gulf War veterans after exercise.
Does that explain twitches in the muscles too?
That's a really, really, really good question.
Because I'll get sporadic twitch, not all the time. It's just all of a sudden I'll have a muscle, whether it's in my arm or my leg, not so much around my upper torso, but my arm or my leg, and just start twitching. I'm like, or my eye. I'm like, what in the world? Go on.
My eye also, and I get the twitches.
Yes, that is a super good question. Like with the eye, that's called blepharospasm. It's got its own separate little name for eyelid twitching. But the muscle twitching, yes, I've seen that in Gulf War veterans too. And I actually, we certainly see it with this kind of condition. I should look up, and so that hopefully next time I can answer the question, is that known to be increased with mitochondrial problems? And I think the answer is yes. But that's a super interesting question. I would bet the answer is yes, but I don't know exactly how that occurs.
Well, also on top of all that is, even with the recovery time it takes most of the vets to get up and get their activities. My doctor back in 1995 wrote a letter that said the conditions of the Gulf War something is causing this. He doesn't know if it was the environment out there of the heat, the exposures we were exposed to, but he said a lot of us get dehydrated quicker than most.
That is also a super interesting observation, and this was not part of our study, but I will mention that when people have mitochondrial problems, they often also lose blood volume. And so there's a reason for getting dehydrated easier than most. And I can go into why that is if you want.
Yeah.
So pretty much any time there's impaired cell energy, and this also happens, by the way, with people who have sleep apnea, where there's episodes of inadequate oxygen during the night, and that means episodes of inadequate cell energy production. Threats to cell energy, that's threats to that cell's survival. For the same reason you can't go for more than a few minutes without oxygen, your cells also, they need oxygen, they need energy. And if they're threatened, that's kind of life or death for the cell, and ultimately that's life or death for the person. So you go into a bit of a fight or flight response where your body releases stress hormones. And one of those stress hormones, called norepinephrine, is known to contract the blood volume. It leads to release of more, quote, diuretic hormones by the body, ones that cause you to lose water, and more natriuretic hormones, ones that cause you to lose salt. And if you lose salt, then you can't hold water in the bloodstream. So the blood volume goes down. And I think this is a big piece of why there's exercise intolerance and difficulty recovering from exercise. And also why in a study by Rahan et al., what they found was after they exercised Gulf War veterans, they tended to fall into one of two groups. One had cognitive problems and one had muscle pain. And my argument is the reason for that is you don't have enough blood. When there's exercise, you need to increase the blood flow to the muscles for them to get enough oxygen and glucose. You don't have enough blood to both give enough blood to the muscles in that time of extra need and also have enough blood and oxygen and sugar to go to the brain. So one of the two of those is going to get a shortfall. Either the brain's not going to get enough because you're trying to give enough to the muscle, or the muscle's not going to get enough because you're trying to keep enough energy going to the brain. So obviously then, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's interesting because so Doc, last time you were on, I asked you this question because I remember when I was able to work, I was working in an industrial setting, and a little warmer. I mean, parts of it would be conditioned, but I was like, I really struggled to understand why I was sweating so profusely. I mean, again, technically I would be considered, probably overweight, but I'm a bigger guy.
Uh-huh.
But that being said, I mean, I've been kind of a heavy sweater, one might say, but it was to the point of ridiculousness where I was almost streaming off my head, and I'd stop and take forever to recover. Didn't matter how much water I seemed to drink. And of course that was back before I could put two and two together. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm changing shirts out, and it didn't make any sense. But your explanation or sharing what the medical knowledge makes it a little clearer as to why.
Well, and let me say that there's another issue with the sweating, and I've known other people not in the Gulf that had a major organophosphate exposure. So as you know, in the Gulf, a lot of veterans they weren't veterans at the time, but service persons at the time were exposed to organophosphates both through nerve gas and through organophosphate pesticides. And organophosphates affect acetylcholine. We kind of talked about that last time. And that leads to, quote, dysregulation, unquote, of the acetylcholine system. So initially there's too much acetylcholine activity, but then that leads the body to release less acetylcholine. But then in some places the body will react to less acetylcholine by trying to produce more a different way. So it leads to acetylcholine dysregulation that is mostly downregulation, but with areas where there will be upregulation, trying to respond to the downregulation. Well, it turns out that acetylcholine is involved in sweating. It's the main chemical that is involved in sweating. It's when there's extra acetylcholine activity for the sweat system that extra sweating will occur. And that's why, one of the sort of acute symptoms that can occur with nerve gas poisoning is extra sweating. So you may also have an alteration in your body's acetylcholine response to sweat. But on top of that, why do you have so much trouble recovering afterward? Well, during the time that you're sweating and losing water when you already didn't really have enough blood volume to begin with, you're depriving those, parts of your body that are not getting enough blood and not getting enough oxygen, et cetera, during that exercise, because there's just not enough blood and water to go around, and then you're making that worse by the increased sweating. Those are taking a hit. I mean, they're being damaged by that time period of not getting enough energy, and that doesn't recover right away. It's not just that you need to recover the water; you need to recover from the injury.
And so
to those cells.
This is what I do, John, because down here right now it's 100 and something degrees every freaking day. And so if I'm outside, I will take a wet towel and I'll either throw it in the freezer or I'll put it in an ice chest full of ice. When I go out and work, I wrap it around me because I know the cooler my body is, the more I won't sweat. The other thing I do, and I don't know, Dr. Golomb, if this is the right thing to do, but I do it, is while I work, I will drink almost a jar of pickle juice along with water, especially if I'm starting to sweat a lot.
That's really smart. If the pickle juice has salt in it, which I assume it does,
Yes.
that is a smart thing to do. And I will say that when I used to take hiking trips, we would, do some hikes that were like labeled extreme and so forth. I would always bring salt with me. And if I became a little bit fatigued, I would just put some salt in my palm and take the salt. And it's amazing how quickly that actually helped revive me. So salt can be really, really important for exertion, especially for people that have had exposures that can lead to lower blood volume.
Yeah, because John, I don't know if you know this, but if you work really hard during the day and you lay at night, you'll get cramps.
Yeah.
Well, getting cramps is also a part of your body not having enough sodium, if I'm correct on that, Dr. Golomb. And so if you drink pickle juice, you will never cramp. I will guarantee that. Have you ever drank pickle juice, John?
No, no.
No, I can't say as ever intentionally. I mean, I could, but so you just no, I have not actually. But I mean, I think I could because I mean, I love I love various types of pickles. It doesn't matter. Now, this is kind of a weird question because I don't know the answer. Does it matter? Is there a particular kind of pickle juice?
Dill pickle.
Or say again?
Dill pickles.
Okay, well, and I love dill pickles, so I mean, okay, that's easy enough.
Well, you know what? Let us know what your experience is with that. I'm curious. And I will say there are a couple other things you can do with muscle cramps at night. For some people, magnesium will make a difference for that. And then there's something called a product called the Stick Muscle Massage. I had somebody look it up like within last week, and I think that company has gone out of business, but you can still buy, the stick, around. And it's basically just a stick. They come in a few different lengths that has little rollers on it. And that's another thing I would bring with me on our hiking trips. And I found out that a lot of athletes over the time that I was using it had started really using them, and their coaches were recommending it because if you use it before exercise, because you roll it along a muscle like, your calves and your thighs and whatever, and it stimulates blood to go to that area before you've exercised. It's kind of like warming up without having to warm up. You're bringing blood and oxygen and glucose to that site, and it's been shown to both reduce injury and for people who do it after exercise to reduce soreness and speed recovery. Because again, what determines, one of the things that contributes to injury is episodes where the energy supply demand isn't matched. That's why you want to warm up before exercise. If you do like a hard pitch, for example, with a baseball before warming up, that the demand on that muscle may exceed the supply because the blood and oxygen and glucose aren't targeting that area yet. Or if you do excessive, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I'm sure that my eating habits, because of the abdominal pain that I have when I eat, I know my eating habits are not good. So I will intentionally not eat, for quite a while because I'm trying to avoid the pain. And then when I do eat, so my body is essentially being starved for too long, and I know this. But then I go to eat, and my eating habits might not be ideal. I've been trying to eat better, and of course that's one of those things that's fighting against me. I'm not eating because of the pain. Then when I do eat, or if I'm out trying to do something, I mean, because so my body's all over the place because I'm trying to deal with something that I don't have any. The only control I have over the pain, really, with the exception of taking a pain medication, is to not eat, which is ridiculous, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. Yep.
But I don't know.
So anyway, just kind of trying to wrap up my statement. So you're right. So a little bit of extra salt can sometimes be important for people with gulfur illness and similar kinds of conditions. It's not like you can rectify it all by taking a bunch of salt at once because people have had less blood volume for a long time, their capillaries have been resorbed. So you got to build those up over time by adding a little bit of extra salt. Also, chocolate has been shown to increase muscle capillarity. Having a small amount of chocolate every day both increases the number of capillaries in the muscle and increases the production of mitochondria, which can be helpful. And also, by the way, increases blood flow to the brain. So the big things that are problems in Gulf War veterans, which are brain and muscle, together with fatigue, can be helped by that. There's a particular compound in chocolate called epicatechin, and in rat studies, I can't remember if it was rats or mice, feeding them the right amount of that every day. Too much, it stops working. But they can't.
But you're talking about a quality chocolate, not this love affair I have with these things called Little Debbie's.
I don't really know about the particular things that you have, but what I will say is it's not just exactly whether it's dark or, milk. It depends on the particular content of the so-called flavanol. So you're right. Better quality chocolate is going to be better in terms of providing the right stuff. But anyway, so mice that are fed this epicatechin from chocolate regularly have increased endurance as though they were exercise trained. And as I say, it also increases the capillarity in muscles. So that means it can sustain a larger blood volume. And by the way, there's data with fibromyalgia, which is that muscle pain condition that a lot of Gulf War veterans have, that shows reduced capillarity in the muscles of fibromyalgia patients. So this all goes with the kind of stuff that we're saying. When you have impaired cell energy, that leads to lower blood volume, which further impairs cell energy and can lead to less capillaries, less ability to deliver that energy in what kind of amounts to a little vicious cycle.
What do you mean by reduced capillary? Help me out.
Meaning, so capillaries are the tiny little blood vessels, and when you don't have enough blood volume, you don't have enough blood volume to put any blood into the littler blood vessels, so they go away. The body just resorbs them.
Okay.
And so those can't be built up all at once. It's not like I can take a cup of salt now and that extra amount of water that'll stay in my body will suddenly have a place to go. It will not. You got to have enough blood volume over time and enough energy to support having that continued blood volume. So things that help cell energy would be expected to be beneficial. Things like, chocolate or coenzyme Q10 or other, carnitine, other things that confer energy support, good quality, diet with good antioxidants and low in the pro-oxidants, because those help shut down blood vessels. The pro-oxidants do too. So you can't just solve the problem in one big go by taking too much salt. You could get into trouble doing that. But you do want to make sure that.
Do you eat good chocolates there, Kevin?
I actually don't eat chocolate. But
really?
Mm-mm.
Huh.
And not everybody maybe should eat chocolate. Chocolate, like pretty much every other food, if your body doesn't like it, it may be for a reason.
Yeah.
Chocolate has high copper levels because of the fungicides they use even in organic chocolate. And now there's recent stuff that came out in I think the last year or so that showed that a lot of chocolate brands are contaminated with mercury and cadmium and heavy metals. So it may, yeah, exactly.
Well,
so if your body's telling you it's not good for you, it may not be good for you.
Okay, so I have this question because you brought up copper. I did not realize how important that is to our life.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know that. Is that I was reading a study, maybe it was your study or something, or maybe you even wrote, but it talked about the copper that a lot of Gulf War vets inside their body, they're missing it. And that if you went down, but you got to go to a real vitamin store and, get the organic, not the, the fake stuff. But if you take amounts of that, that will also help build stuff back up. I was learning that also, along with reading about eating the pickles and about trying not to sweat as much by putting a cold towel around your neck and try not to sweat as much as you can until all of it starts working into your system.
Well, let me tell you, if you can find whatever it was you found about the copper, send it to me, because we do have some super interesting findings related to copper and Gulf War illness, but they're not that one. We were looking at what drives Gulf War veterans, and this paper's been accepted for publication, so I can talk about it. why do Gulf War veterans, so many Gulf War veterans say, gee, before the war, and maybe I mentioned this last time, I can't remember, but before the war, I loved practically bathing in automotive fluids, and now I can't be anywhere near them. They, make me sick, and I can't tolerate alcohol, and I can't tolerate drugs, and I can't tolerate, prescription drugs, and I have a lot of Gulf War veterans have more problems with solvents and chemicals and radiation, a lot of other things than they had before. So we thought, okay, well, why is that? And are there some exposures that make people intolerant to a whole bunch of different exposures? And so we actually investigated that in data from both affected Gulf War veterans and healthy controls. And we gave them a huge list of things. Have you been exposed to this? Drugs, chemicals, radiation, et cetera. And then for each thing that they were exposed to, did you have an adverse event with it? And then also, we looked at which exposures predicted a high fraction of things you were exposed to having problems with. And both in affected Gulf War veterans and in healthy controls, the same top things emerged as predicting problems. It was pesticides and radiation as the top predictors in the bad direction. And unexpectedly, for every one of those groups, for the total sample, adjusted for Gulf War, whether you're a Gulf War veteran, for Gulf War veterans separately, for control separately, in the older age and the younger age, in addition to those two things being positive predictors, copper exposure was a protective predictor. And that was not something that we were anticipating, because we were really looking at exposures as though they were bad things. But copper, I looked it up, and it turns out that supposedly a high fraction of the U.S. population is deficient in copper, and copper is involved in some major detoxification pathways. Like there's something called ATOX, which is a really important detoxification enzyme. And then one of the two main, quote, superoxide dismutase, or SOD2s, is called the copper zinc SOD, or SODs, is the SOD1, which is the copper zinc SOD. So copper turns out to be super important in detoxification. I was actually listening in on a webinar where they were presenting a family that had really severe multiple chemical sensitivity, and their genes for a lot of the typical antioxidants seemed like they were all fine, but what they all shared in common was defects in these copper-containing antioxidant pathways. So it's super interesting that you're mentioning that copper may be important in Gulf War veterans, because it unexpectedly emerged as this, protective predictor against having toxicity from any drugs and chemicals in both Gulf War veterans, and although they had fewer exposures, and in healthy controls. The Gulf War veterans had higher rates of this sort of adverse effect predisposition, like the fraction of things they were exposed to that they had problems with was much higher in Gulf War veterans than in controls, but the predictors of having those problems were the same in both groups.
Oh yeah, but if I smell oil, it's like, oh my God, just to
Yeah.
smell, like going to oil, get my oil changed. I cannot
Yeah.
stand that smell.
Really? So now with me when I'm in a grocery store, I got to go through say an aisle that's got laundry detergent and stuff like that. If I need it, I got to go and get out really quick, because if I'm in there for more than 30 seconds, I'm going to get one heck of a headache. I mean, so laundry detergents and stuff like that, almost not quite instantaneous headache, but real close to it. So,
yeah.
And one other thing, if not that people are going to go around smelling natural gas, but when you go by some plants and you'll smell the natural gas, or your home, if you're heated with natural gas, if there's even the slightest leak, that almost, and I don't know why, because it never used to. Now that almost puts me into a panic mode just to smell that. Why, I have no idea. But it does. I mean, obviously you want to fix the leak, right? I mean, if you're trying to turn the burner on a gas stove, if my wife has been trying to light it, if I come in and smell that, I'm like, oh no, I can't handle that.
Right.
I don't know why.
And I will say that the third biggest predictor of these problems, it was just a little bit less consistent than the other two, were fuels and solvents. So exposure to those also seem to predispose people to these issues. And we're still trying to understand better, because the things that you're mentioning, like natural gas, they get into cell membranes and affect the properties of those cell membranes. And we're doing a study right now trying to look at membrane properties in Gulf War veterans because we think that may turn out to be really important too. But yeah, you guys are exactly making my point. That a lot of Gulf War veterans who didn't have any problems, like, before the war in terms of sensitivities to smells or exposures or drugs, now have a lot of these sensitivities. And there's one study by Reed that said that it's especially common, that high chemical sensitivity in veterans that were exposed to pesticides, but that's not the only group that has those problems.
Well, what's funny is that so many people, like I'm looking on here, Mike and Shane both talk about the smell of detergents drives them crazy.
Yes.
And to me, I never thought about it. But if I go down, I don't. We order that stuff online because there's a lot of smells. I cannot smell like it used to. Ever since I had the coronavirus, I've been able to smell. So I'm quite happy now. Right?
Oh, so you don't?
I lost my smell. I lost my smell 3 years ago.
Really?
Nope. Yeah, and boy, but now, like when I would go to Mexico, if I would walk down a certain part of an area, I swear I can smell things, and it smells like countries I have been in. That's how it used to be. Now I can't smell at all. You can take out the trash. You can put anything in it, I won't be able to smell it.
Wow. Okay. See,
well, I will say that like changes in the sense of smell are often related to either deficiencies in zinc or problems with zinc utilization. And I think, we heard that a lot of people with COVID got loss of sense of smell. I think a lot of them recovered, but it sounds like your loss of sense of smell might actually be helping you. But otherwise, if that were not the case, it might be worth, obviously check with your physician. None of this is medical advice, but you could consider assessing whether a little bit of a zinc supplement would make a difference for that or not.
Yeah, I take zinc now, and
okay.
I'm quite happy not smelling.
Okay, well then never mind.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're better off not having a sense of smell.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, but now I'll tell you the one thing about my skin, though. My skin is very sensitive. If the weather changes, I mean, my hands and my feet will start peeling like that. And I mean, I constantly have to put lotions on them and stuff like that. So I've noticed ever since I went from Desert Storm and I came back, I've always had skin problems after that.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
When you were in the Gulf, did you use sunscreen?
Never.
Never.
No.
And the reason I'm asking that is that actually the other thing that came out when we looked at the Gulf Pacific population is that the people that did use sunscreen actually had more problems.
Really?
Yeah, which was a little unexpected, but maybe not, because ultraviolet B, which you get from the sun, ultraviolet light leads that. Well, when you get a tan, what is a tan? It's melanin. And what does melanin do? And why does the body have you make melanin? Because it's an antioxidant. It protects against the oxidative stress from the radiation, but it also protects against the oxidative stress from other things that end up on your skin. So we think that's why this risk of having higher adverse effects, and particularly on the skin, was higher in people that use sunscreen in theater, which again, we weren't expecting, but again, it emerged again and again as a predictor. So
now, how about vitamin C? A lot of vets are vitamin B deficiency, like I am, and a lot of us are vitamin D. Why is that?
Okay, so vitamin D, oxidative stress, which is that like nasty free radicals that come if you get exposed to bad things like pesticides or radiation or practically any other chemical or any other bad food, or if you have bad mitochondria like Gulf War veterans have, oxidative stress depresses the levels of vitamin D. So it doesn't have to mean that you have too little intake or too little sun exposure. There are studies showing that surfers in Hawaii, a lot of them now have low levels of vitamin D, and they're definitely not having a problem getting enough sun exposure. So the problem is a lot of people have thought, gee, low vitamin D is tied to condition X, whether it's heart disease or cancer or this or that or COVID severity or this or that, and therefore supplementing with vitamin D will surely cure X. And almost all the time it doesn't. There are some things that vitamin D has been found to be good for, but it's not because you didn't get enough vitamin D. It's because it's the oxidative stress that's causing both the low vitamin D and the other condition, not the vitamin D in most cases that's causing the other problem. So that's for the vitamin D. Now for B vitamins, it turns out those are all super important for both mitochondrial function and antioxidation. So they get used up in people that have like mitochondria are in trouble. They need more of those B vitamins, and they basically are consuming more of the B vitamins. So that's probably why, in my
Hey, Kevin, I
opinion, the
gotta
B
get off.
vitamins are low.
We're getting a hail here. I'm gonna get off here. Okay.
Okay, man. Y'all be
All
careful.
right. Later.
Okay.
Yep, later.
So, Doc, John had to go. They're getting hell, and so there could be tornadoes. He needs to go check
Oh
it
my
out.
God.
Yeah, he'll get back on as soon as it's over. But, Dr. Golomb, with me, I'm both deficiency. And so, and with more and more vets I'm talking to, it's like, okay, so I have to take the injections because I cannot absorb it. So I get injections. And I never knew how important vitamin B or D was to our lives, but
Yep.
my vitamin B got down all the way to a 70. And the VA panicked. I've never seen doctors panic in my lifetime. I got more injections in 1 month than I've ever had in my lifetime. And they could not get that up. They finally did, and it took them almost a year to get it up to 300 by injecting me.
Okay.
Because I just lose it so quickly.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, that's super interesting. This is the first I'm hearing this. And that you said for your vitamin, what was that, B12?
B12, and as it,
Yeah.
like they finally did a colonoscopy and an endoscopy, and they found out my spores. I guess in the lining of your stomach you have B12 spores. I don't have them anymore. They're gone, and they were like they were chemically burned off. And so I was like, okay. And so when they were injecting me, I take injections almost once a week of 1,000 milligrams of B12. And
yeah, and B12 is super important for cell energy production. So, yeah.
yeah, and so my B12 sits about 500, even with injections once a week.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. And so, but that's with a lot of Go For veterans. That's
really good for me to know. I honestly hadn't known that. But again, it makes sense. You know, we just finished this mitochondrial cocktail study where among the other things we did was we gave a bunch of B vitamins together with the other things. We haven't seen the results of that yet. And I actually don't, I'd have to go back and look to see if B12 was even part of that. But yeah, all the B vitamins are super important for cell energy, and the expectation is that affected Gulf War veterans would need more. So that's really, really interesting.
yeah. And then
Do you feel better? I bet you would feel a bit better with the B12 injections.
yeah.
Yeah.
I used to, the day before I would need my injection, I'd be completely worn down.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that's what that caused my neuropathy. was I was B12 deficient for so long.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, it took them 2 years to figure it out.
Interesting. Wow.
And so most people don't realize the deficiencies, even especially as you get older. If what they did to us then and what we were exposed to there is a combination of so many things that they won't pinpoint to one exact thing. And if they do, they will never tell us. But
Right.
for us veterans that are coming out of it trying to learn more, the biggest thing I can tell them is research your vitamins. The most important vitamins that need to go inside your body, you don't even know that you're supposed to have them.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And I will say that a general rule of thumb that I always had is when people have unexplained problems that include neurological problems, among the things that you should always test are B12 and thyroid levels. So it is a little surprising that it took him 2 years, but I guess maybe not that surprising. But
Yeah. Well, you got to think of how many people that they have. I mean, it got to the point that
Sure,
I couldn't
for
walk.
sure.
I couldn't walk. I was in so much pain. I was calling them. I was bawling my eyes out, begging them to do something. Then finally, this doctor was like, "Hey, why don't we check your B12?" And when they saw that, that's whenever everybody panicked. And so, and that's important for everybody. And for y'all to understand, I brought up copper earlier. Look into it. Understand how big of a role copper will play for Desert Storm vets. And
I will say that copper can also be toxic if there's too much. So
too much.
you want to be careful with copper. Yeah.
Right. And there's a recommended amount of copper you're supposed to take daily. That's why you go to a nutrition store or see a nutritionist doctor, and they'll be able to tell you the right amount. But that's what I'm doing. I've changed my whole diet. I don't.
Yeah.
I want to stay away from as much junk food as I can
Good for you.
and be more natural.
Yep.
And which is hard because I try to go organic.
Yep.
And I mean, I even learned from a doctor that we were talking about. I was like, yeah, I cook in olive oil and this, and this. And he was telling me, he said, look, you should also cook in butter also.
I agree with him. Good for him.
And he said, a lot of people don't realize not having the bad and the good will mess your bodies up too. So he said,
well, it's not really just bad. I mean, butter is a super rich source of a lot of really important fat soluble nutrients, like vitamin E and so forth that your body really needs. And by the way, some people that get neuropathy, it's from deficiency of vitamin E or vitamin A. So butter is a health food. Your membranes may benefit from butter. Unlike margarine, in old studies like the Nurses' Health Study, they found that like the number of pats of margarine that people ate a day was tied to the risk of heart disease, but the number of pats of butter was not. So people think of butter as a food that's bad for your heart, but the studies that specifically looked at that did not bear that out. So yeah.
When he told me that, that blew me away. I was like, you got to be kidding me. And then I asked him about, like I like to eat a lot of red meat.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, it depends how you cook it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was
like. And did he tell you not to cook it at a high temperature?
Yeah. And he also told me you don't cook it all the way through.
Okay.
And so he said that like a steak, you should cook it at medium rare instead of well done. He said, because what you're doing is if you cook it and you're cooking all the vitamins out of it. And he says, if you undercook it, he said, then you can create more problems. So
that is absolutely true. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you want to make sure you're killing off any parasites and bad stuff in the meat. But high temperatures lead to production of something called acrylamides that are toxic. Even with that, the large human studies that look at, all-cause mortality and red meat consumption find that processed red meat is tied to higher death rate, but unprocessed red meat is not. So like ham, bacon, all those things, or processed red meat, or anything that involves like little pieces of meat packaged into something else, those are all kind of bad for the body. But regular red meat is not. Now, I have no idea how that's going to change, if, we use more and more toxic antibiotics in food or whatever. It's almost surprising to me that it was neutral as it is. And I would suspect that it would actually be, a little bit on the favorable side if it were, organic and pasture raised, because pasture raised cattle produce a lot of omega 3s in their meat and milk, and grain raised cattle do not. So actually, the nutrient profile and heart healthiness is much, much higher for pasture raised cattle milk and meat than for traditionally raised.
And that's why I eat a lot of deer meat.
Yep. Yep.
That's one of the best meats out there that you can eat. And then, so, the more and more you start learning and the more and more you start understanding what studies are coming out, people need to pay attention to them, and they also need to do them. And that's why, veterans out there who are not having issues should, like, especially Gulf War veterans who aren't having issues, need to do your studies also. And that's an important thing, along with the ones who are having problems. And so it's almost taking the good with the bad. And so
right, and it helps us see what's different. Like for those people who are not affected, how did they manage to stay unaffected? Do they have, some genes that that are different or better or confer protection? Do they differ in how their genes are expressing, like how much of a given gene, each gene makes a protein. Some people have the same genes but make more or less of that protein. Do those things give us clues about what is causing Gulf War illness and what's protecting some people for that? So yeah, that can be really, really important and helpful. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, and so I just, want y'all to know I've been doing my homework. I've been understanding ever since I talked to you last time. I started really looking into more vitamin stuff and more eating better and understanding what's good for the body and what's not. And when he brought up chocolate Little Debbie cakes, I was like, you're not supposed to be eating that crap. Especially once, I tell everybody, once you hit 45, you better start taking care of your body. Because in 20 years, you're going to be thinking about, well, what the hell? I wish I would take care of my body then. It's almost, right. Because, when you're younger, we play with fire. We do the dumbest stuff, everything.
That is so true.
Who can get the drunkest? Who can go do this? And then when you turn 30, you're like, okay, I need to slow down. But when you turn, something about turning 40, you start thinking, God, man, if I took care of my body back then, like I should now, your body can heal itself as time goes. But then we wait till we're about 50, 55, 60 and say, God, if I would take care of my body back when I said in the 40s. So think about it. Everybody needs to eat proper, take vitamins, do what they're supposed to do. And is there anything else that you would like to have a hot topic on before we jump off?
No, but we didn't really talk about the thing we were originally going to talk about.
Yes,
so maybe we do that on another occasion.
Yes, I know. That I tell you, and Denise Nichols did post it on the Gulf War illness pages, and that about the study and about that stuff. And people, y'all go read it. Understand? I truly believe you're probably, besides Dr. Nicholson, I love him to death. He has really good information. But I really feel like you truly care about the vets. And I truly feel that you're welcomed anytime you need to come on this program and talk.
Oh, thank you.
That I want you to. No, because a lot of people, when they feel like there's a researcher, study, doctors, and them that really care, that's who they want to hear from. That gives a lot of the Gulf War veterans a lot of hope. And up there. And I want you to know there's a lot of people that believe in your study and what you're doing.
Oh, that is really touching to hear that. Thank you so much. That means more than I can say.
Yeah. And of course, we're going to stay in touch. You got my phone number, my email. But I did want to ask just one more really, really simple question. Especially with fibromyalgia.
Okay.
Okay. So with people that have fibromyalgia, is there like a recommendation that you would recommend as far as a vitamin? Because like my mom has it. And back in the day, they used to say, back in the 90s, everybody understand, fibromyalgia was not known as a nerve or muscle problem. It was known as a psychological problem.
Yeah.
I did not know that until my mom told me that.
Yeah, and there's still doctors that wrongly think that is the case.
Right.
So I guess so there is one study that looked at coenzyme Q10 and found that it improved fibromyalgia. It wasn't a cure, but again, if you're helping cell energy, then over time it may help the blood volume, and that may help you bring back the capillaries into muscle. The study from Francisco Villarreal that showed that like low amounts of chocolate regularly, at least in rats, enhanced the mitochondrial production and capillary production in muscle, suggests that low dose, regular chocolate might benefit. And there are lots and lots of other things that it's been shown to be tied to better outcomes on, including heart disease and stroke. And there are even double blind studies in older people showing improvement in cognitive function with chocolate. So chocolate is a possible option. I just read something within the last couple days that reported that that testosterone was helpful for fibromyalgia. I don't know, I haven't read enough studies, but that one actually found improvement in fibromyalgia with testosterone. I'm trying to think. I think it might have been in injections, but I'd have to go back and look at the study. So those are, and by the way, like stuff like testosterone, all the steroid hormones are made in mitochondria. And so it may be that the, decline in mitochondrial function is related to the decline in testosterone. There are studies showing that the testosterone drop that occurs with aging relates to the drop in aspects of mitochondrial function, like there's something called mitochondrial fusion, and apparently things that correct that help correct the drops in testosterone. So that may be, again, that those mitochondrial problems may both relate to muscle pain in and of themselves, and maybe, but this is going a little bit on a limb, this is a little bit, putting a couple pieces of puzzle together that may not exactly fit right, or it may also be related to drops in testosterone that can for sure also affect muscle. You mentioned vitamin D earlier. There are some studies that find that vitamin D support reduces muscle pain. Those studies are a little bit variable. It certainly doesn't help pain in general, but it seems to for sure help some people's pain that is related to muscle weakness. And that makes sense because vitamin D has been shown, like in older people, to enhance muscle mass and muscle strength. And when muscles are weaker, they are definitely more subject to developing pain. So those are a few things that I know of. I could try to go look and see what else has been studied in fibromyalgia. It's not something I've looked up recently, but those are some things that come to the, top of my head.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to thank you for coming on. And I want to thank everybody for listening. But it's always a pleasure talking with you.
Well, and thank you for having me. And it's absolutely a pleasure talking to you as well. And I really appreciate your show. And I hope you guys are okay with the hail and all that.
Yeah, that's John. John, we're keeping you in our prayers. Hope everything's fine. Oh, there he is.
Hey, I'm back.
All right.
I just
What part of the country are you in?
I'm in Iowa.
And you're having hail in July?
Yes, ma'am. Well, see, we had a really large hailstorm back in 2006, 2009. It was really bad, and it was like 5-inch hail, and it was in July then. And so when I hear tink 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 on the windows, I go into a bit of a panic mode now, because we lost all of our windows, like a tremendous amount of damage to our house. So a little
wow.
I panicked
5-inch hail.
Yeah. Back then it was 5-inch hail. Yeah, 5 inch.
Wow.
So,
wow.
So our little town here got pretty well hammered.
Hey, we got about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, we had a storm come through here that I've never seen in my lifetime. And in the middle of June, it came down. It looked like a cold front coming down, and it produced 102 mile per hour winds, highest ever recorded. And And I mean, when it lightened, it was green. No reported tornadoes. That was just the wind gust. And so,
Wow.
Yep. So yes, July hail in July in the Midwest. Not too
Not an
crazily.
unheard of phenomenon. Wow.
well, everybody's safe. But everybody, I want to wish y'all a great night. You know, check in on your vitamins, make sure you're doing right. And also, when y'all go do blood work, have them check on vitamin B, have them check on vitamin D. It's important to you. And a lot of doctors don't do that unless you ask for it. So just to let y'all know about that. But Dr. Glum and John, I want y'all to have a great night. Thank y'all for coming on.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you
thank
so
you,
much for
Doc.
having me. Take good care.
All right. Take
All
care,
right.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Take
All right.
care.
Thank you for listening to Go For Side Effects. If you have a story or you would like to share or just come on with any comments or questions, please email me at kevinsimon@goforsideeffects.com.